Now, listen, tell us about this sword on your face, because I know it has to do with the Lord of the Rings.
That's
and
right.
I want to know how that happened and when you got excited enough about Lord of the Rings to be like, I'd like that on my head.
So I'm a huge Lord of the Rings guy. When I was young, I read The Hobbit. That was my introduction.
Good.
Which is good.
Yeah.
You don't want to read The Lord of the Rings first. You want to go Hobbit first. So I read The Hobbit, and I was like, oh, everything's different now. It's one of those moments. And
how old were you?
I must have been so young. 9?
So I love it. So
I was a reader. I was like Matilda. Have you ever seen that movie?
Yeah.
Like I read a crazy amount.
Yeah.
We used to have this reading program at the middle school where if you like read a book, you could take a test on it. And if you passed the test, you got points. And I read every book in the library. Every book.
I killed them. I killed them all. Every single one of them.
Like I read like 50 plus books a year now.
That is remarkable.
Yeah, I love to read. So I like crush. So The Lord of the Rings is huge for me. So I read The Hobbit, and then I read Lord of the Rings, and I was like, okay. Well,
and how old were you when you read Lord of the Rings?
I read Lord of the Rings when I was like 11 or 12.
That is amazing, yeah.
Yeah. So I remember being excited about Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings at the same time.
Yeah.
And then I kind of got farther into Harry Potter and I read Lord of the Rings, and I read Return of the King. I remember I finished it and I go, oh, okay. So this is what literature could be. I'm out. Or fantasy, like, okay.
Yeah, she's a good writer. Don't get me wrong. Harry Potter's very well written. And I'm sure it's a great story. But once you've read The Lord of the Rings or Dostoevsky, it's very difficult to go backwards.
Yeah. And there's a lot of... Then I read Wheel of Time.
Yeah.
And then I'm reading also... And I'm like, okay, come on. This is it, And so I'm reading this stuff. And Lord of the Rings is great. Then I found out about the Silmarillion. And I read it. And it's kind of like the Bible. I'm like, I got to read this slow. And like, I got to think about it. I got to read it. When you read and you get like... you get on autopilot and you finish a page, you go, I gotta go back.
Yep.
I gotta reread that page. Dang it. I was imagining.
That's why I hate listening to audiobooks, because my mind always drifts, and then it's not as easy to return to where you were, whereas with the pages you kind of know where you drift.
Yeah. Sometimes I get so into it that I'm not even thinking about something else. I'm like in the world. I can induce daydreams. When I was a kid, I literally had a problem with it where they're like, you daydream too much. And now as an adult, I can like just sit with music and daydream. Like it was impossible to punish me as a child. You would like go sit in the corner and I would like, awesome. I'm just going to go to dream world where like my daydreams are real to me. It's an actual medical condition. So anyway,
Wow.
so I'm there, And so, I read Lord of the Rings, I read the Silmarillion, I'm having to read it and then stop. And the Silmarillion is beautiful. Tolkien's extended works, the history of Middle Earth, all these things, they're so wonderful because they're told in a history, like a historian in Middle Earth talking about ages gone by. It's like 2 steps removed. It's perfect.
I remember the first time I read, what is it on concerning hobbits, like the first chapter of the Lord of the Rings. Yeah. You read it and then you're like, whoa, is there a lot that I've missed out on?
Yeah.
Because you just get immersed into the world. Yeah.
It's so good. So these histories, they give you just enough that you can sit with it and imagine it. Almost like reading about Caesar's campaign in Gaul, almost like reading about Alexander, Charlemagne, and I'm just like imagining how all this is happening, and it's like firing me up. And so Lord of the Rings changes my life, and it becomes this thing that I'm crazy obsessed with, and I consume everything. I'm reading Tolkien's letters. I'm going online and looking for like Xeroxes of all his letters. I'm going nuts on it. Every piece of Tolkien content. I'm reading fan fiction. I'm playing video games. So I go nuts for Tolkien. The movies come out, they're all right. They're pretty good.
Yeah.
They take out
well, it's kind of like what we were talking about, like great author next to mediocre author.
Yeah.
It's like that. If you've tasted the pure beauty of Tolkien, watching anything, even if it approximates it better than something else, is nothing.
Yeah.
Or something, but not enough.
So I enjoy these things, and so anyway, I used to have a friend with a gun tattooed on his face, and he was a scary guy, and he's very tough, a very, very scary guy. And so I always thought it was funny to have tough guy tattoos, and so which is why I have a lot of nerdy tattoos, almost as like I don't even need to try. You guys are being ridiculous, and so I always joked that I would get a sword.
Okay.
like, you have the gun, I'm gonna get a sword. I'll sword you, bro. And so I got older, and my first special does great, and my second special comes out and it's good too. And there was this moment in my life where I thought, when my second special comes out, my career is over. It will not do good, and I will simply vanish into the night,
right,
and everything will be over, and that'll be fine. I'm still to this day kind of like, it'll be okay when I go back to a regular job. This has been more than I could ever imagine I would get. And so I do the second one, and it does even better. I'm like, I gotta reward myself. And I'm like, you know what's the craziest thing I've ever wanted? A sword on my face. And then I go, you know what else? Tolkien.
Wait, is this after the first Dry Bar special?
Yeah.
Oh, so you didn't have the sword?
I didn't have the sword until after.
Okay.
So I got Anduril tattooed on my face, the shards of Narsil. Yeah. And so I got it. I love it. It's my favorite. Most people think it's a cross, which I'm happy. I think it's like a dual meaning almost. Yeah. It's sick. So yeah.
Big Tolkien fan.
I love Tolkien. And then I have the Witch King tattooed on me, and I've got the Tree of Gondor tattooed on me. Big fan of Tolkien. Love all of his work. And he was another inroad into Catholicism for me. Right. You know? And then he hated allegory, but you can't help but see how he was affected. And like, you know, there's guys like Tolkos, the Valar, who defeats Morgoth. And even though he's just a minor Valar and not a Iluvatar, he takes down the Dark Lord. How you can't compare that to St. Michael, I don't know.
Yeah, so I've heard that he hated allegory. I understand that. And I can actually sympathize with it. When I read C.S. Lewis's work, sometimes it feels too much on the nose. Yeah. It's his kid fiction, I mean.
Yeah.
But, you know, you read the first chapter of the Silmarillion, and how is that not allegory for the creation story? Or maybe it's not as allegory because it just is a creation story.
I think it's Europe's pagan past mixed with its Christian future, because Iluvatar isn't pure love. I think that he loves his creations, but he's very hands off. He created the Valar, and he kind of left the Valar to their own devices on Arda. And our God is very present in all of our lives. And also we're made in his image. Eru Iluvatar, he created elves first, and dwarves aren't even a creation of Eru. They're a creation of Manwë, who wanted to copy his father. He wanted to create life as well. That's the story. Manwë and Melkor, who or Morgoth as he's later called, they are parallels because they both want to create like their father, but one creates, sees the error of his ways, accepts his father's love and forgiveness, and moves on. So he creates the dwarves. He creates 7 dwarves, but they can only be alive when he's around. He can't quite create life. He can get close, but he can't quite. And so Eru finds him and goes, "What are you doing with these weird little naked bearded guys? These guys are wild. You made these? What the heck?" And then he's like, you can't do this. And Manwë's like, "My bad. I just thought I would try." They can't even do anything when I'm not around. And Eru goes, "I take pity on these creatures," and he breathes life into the dwarves. And so he allows the dwarves to exist, but they only exist because Manwë of Valar wanted them to, and because Eru took pity on them. He saw like, well, these are a creation, my grandsons, and I'll love them and breathe life into them. So now they're a whole thing, which is why they are kind of like elves. They're more powerful than humans, which are sort of the end-all be-all of Eru's plan for Arda. So anyway, Melkor wants to create, right? He becomes discordant as they sing the song of creation. I always like to imagine they're like singing these beautiful hymns, and Melkor's like, bum, 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 you know, like, and then a bunch of course, the Valar fall with Melkor, and which is the creation story. It's pretty spot on. And so Melkor creates, but he can't quite create either, but he twists. Yeah. He gets around needing Eru to breathe life into his creations by twisting them and making them evil. And so he makes orcs and all these other foul things. And then there's like interesting things that you don't consider, like the fact that tree ents are a living representation of nature, and they're like a beautiful representation of nature. Where trolls, they turn to stone. They're a representation of rock, of nothing. They're like a twisted sense of nature, because Ents return to the trees, trolls return to the rock. Like, and so anyway, you got all this stuff, and
so Melkor's creating.
Melkor
or is he distorting?
He's it's not quite clear if he's creating new things. Tolkien often says he's distorting what has been.
So I was of the impression that the orcs were kind of distorted elves. Is that not the case?
There's two schools of thought. I think he kind of retconned himself and then unretconned himself, and there's letters. So there are people who think that they're distorted elves, and there are people who think that they are twisted creations of life. And so it's hard to tell. And there are different types of orcs, and there are half orcs, which is an implication that we don't even need to consider because it's very bad. But another reason that Tolkien kind of quite didn't do Christianity in his world is because he's dealing with very little gray area. It's total and complete pure unredeemable evil versus good, whereas our God, no one is unredeemable. So I think that's a beautiful distinction, and it's kind of an interesting, it's what makes it fantasy, is that there is pure irredeemable evil versus good, and now you're ontologically evil and we can fight you with everything we have, and that's an interesting thing to think about. But yeah,
you're gonna fit so in with many Catholics. Getting super pumped about Tolkien.
Yeah, I love Tolkien. He's my guy. So, but yeah, orcs are twisted elves. I like to think that he found elves and some unfortunate elves when they were made during the creation, because they lived in darkness at first. The world had no light for a time, and the elves lived in darkness, and they had like this colony, and they were afraid of the trees. They didn't quite understand what's going on. Melkor was in there and he was plucking them up. And so he created the first group of orcs, and then those elves, who are themselves magical and capable of great deeds and sort of creation in a way, they propagated what later becomes the orcs, and how and why they do it is a mystery to all of us. And so we don't really understand, and I kind of think it's better that way.
Hey, thank you so much for watching. Before you go, do us a favor, leave a comment, let us know what you thought of the video, like, and subscribe.